When I walked into my childhood home that Thanksgiving morning, the smell of roasting turkey should have felt like coming home. Instead, my father's eyes swept over me from head to toe, and before I could even set down my purse, he said it. "You're really not going to do anything about that?" The room went silent. My mother pretended to adjust the centerpiece. My brother suddenly became very interested in his phone. I was 28 years old, and I had just driven 4 hours from Boston to our family home in suburban Connecticut. I had a master's degree in marketing, a promising career at a respected firm, and an apartment I loved in the city. But in that moment, standing in the entryway with November rain still clinging to my coat, none of that mattered. To him, I was just the daughter who embarrassed the family. The truth is, this wasn't new. My father, Richard Hartwell, had built his entire identity around appearances. A successful corporate lawyer with silver hair always perfectly combed, designer suits that never wrinkled, and a reputation in our affluent neighborhood that he guarded like treasure. Our home, a colonial-style house with white columns and a manicured lawn, looked like something from a magazine. Everything had to be perfect. Everyone had to fit the image. And I didn't fit. I had struggled with my weight since middle school. While my brother excelled at lacrosse and my mother maintained her size 4 figure through relentless discipline, I found comfort in food when the pressure became too much. By high school, I was a size 16. By college, a size 20. And now, standing in that hallway, I was a size 24. And finally starting to feel okay about it. "Dad, can we not do this today?" I said quietly, my voice steady despite the tightness in my chest. "I'm just concerned about your health, Emma," he replied, using that tone he reserved for cross-examinations, clinical, detached, as if he were discussing a case file rather than his own daughter. "Your mother and I worry." My mother said nothing. She never did. I moved past him into the living room, where family photos lined the mantel. Dozens of them. My brother's wedding, family vacations, holiday portraits. I noticed, not for the first time, that the most recent photo of me was from 5 years ago when I was considerably thinner. It was as if the current version of me didn't exist in the family narrative. My brother, Michael, approached me with that apologetic look he'd perfected over the years. "Hey, Em," he said, giving me a one-armed hug. "How was the drive?" "Long," I said, grateful for the normalcy of the question. "Traffic on 95 was probably terrible, right?" We made small talk about roads and weather, anything to avoid the elephant in the room, or rather, the elephant that my father thought was in the room. Michael's wife, Sarah, was in the kitchen helping my mother. I could hear their voices, the clink of dishes, the normalcy of holiday preparation that felt so far from what I was experiencing. The rest of that Thanksgiving was excruciating. During dinner, he made a show of serving me smaller portions. "Just looking out for you," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. When my aunt complimented my new job, talking about how she'd heard I was doing innovative work in digital marketing, he changed the subject to Michael's latest case at his law firm. When I mentioned I was thinking about taking a leadership training course, he suggested I might want to focus on personal development first. Everyone knew what he meant. My aunt, who'd never been one to read a room, pressed on. "Emma, I saw that campaign you worked on for that organic food company. It was everywhere. You must be so proud." "I am," I said, feeling a flicker of warmth. "It was a challenging project, but the response has been incredible." My father cut in. "Marketing is a competitive field. Very appearance-focused, isn't it? I imagine that presents certain challenges." The table went quiet. My aunt looked confused. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Michael stared at his plate. "Actually," I said, my voice calm despite the rage building in my chest, "the industry is changing. There's a growing recognition that diverse perspectives create better work. My size hasn't been a barrier. If anything, it's given me insights that others miss." "Well," my father said, taking a sip of his wine, "I'm sure you know best." The dismissal in his tone was clear. I wasn't worth arguing with. My experiences weren't valid enough to defend. I left before dessert, claiming I had work the next day. The truth was, I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. My mother walked me to the door, her hand briefly touching my arm. "Drive safely," she whispered. and there was something in her eyes that looked like regret. But she didn't say anything else. She never did. The 4-hour drive back to Boston felt longer in the dark. Rain hammered against my windshield as I crossed into Massachusetts, and somewhere around Worcester, I started crying. Not the quiet, dignified tears I'd learned to produce in that house, but ugly, gasping sobs that made me pull over at a rest stop. I sat in my car in that fluorescent-lit parking lot, watching other travelers hurry through the rain, and I made a decision. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep showing up to be diminished, criticized, and erased. I couldn't keep hoping he would see me differently. The rain pounded on the roof of my car, and I thought about all the Thanksgivings, all the Christmases, all the family gatherings where I'd felt like an unwelcome guest in my own family. I thought about my high school graduation, where he'd spent the entire day commenting on how the gown was unflattering on me. I thought about my college graduation, where he'd asked if I'd considered joining a gym before starting my job search. I thought about every birthday card that included a gym membership or a diet book alongside the obligatory check. I was done. I was so deeply, profoundly done. That night, back in my apartment in Boston South End, I looked around at the life I'd built. My walls were covered with my own photos, art I'd collected from local galleries, concert posters from shows I'd attended with friends who actually enjoyed my company. My bookshelf overflowed with novels, marketing journals, and cookbooks I actually used. My closet held clothes I'd chosen because I liked them, not because they hid my body. I had friends who texted me daily. My best friend Rachel, who I'd met in college and who'd never once made me feel like my body was something to apologize for. My coworker James, who invited me to try new restaurants and actually wanted to hear about my day. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who was 73 and fierce and told me I reminded her of herself at my age. I had a career that was actually taking off. The campaign my aunt had mentioned had won 2 industry awards. My boss had hinted at a promotion. Clients specifically requested to work with me because I brought fresh perspectives to their brands. I had hobbies I loved. My amateur photography, which I'd been developing for years, capturing the city in ways that felt true to how I experienced it. The cooking classes I'd been taking in the North End, where I'd learned to make fresh pasta and wasn't made to feel guilty for enjoying food. The literacy program I volunteered with on weekends, helping adults learn to read and watching their worlds open up. I had a life that was full and meaningful, and mine. But my father had never asked about any of it. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes, but a clear mind. I opened my laptop and drafted an email. Not angry, not accusatory, just honest. I told him that I loved him, but I couldn't keep subjecting myself to his judgment. I told him I was successful, happy, and surrounded by people who valued me. I told him that my weight was not a topic of discussion, negotiation, or concern. I told him that until he could see me as a whole person rather than a problem to be fixed, I needed distance. I didn't send it immediately. I sat with it for 3 days, reading and rereading, making sure every word was exactly what I meant. I showed it to Rachel, who'd been encouraging me to set boundaries for years. She read it twice, then looked at me with tears in her eyes. "This is perfect," she said. "It's honest without being cruel. It's clear without being vindictive. Are you ready to send it?" "I think so," I said. "I'm terrified, but I think so." And then, on a cold Monday morning in December, while sitting at my desk with my coffee growing cold beside me, I pressed send. He called within an hour. I didn't answer. He called again, and again. By the end of the week, I had 17 missed calls and a dozen text messages, each one some variation of, "We need to talk about this," and "You're overreacting," and "This is ridiculous, Emma." I didn't respond to any of them. What he didn't know was that I wasn't sitting in my apartment crying about our fractured relationship. I was working. I was thriving. 3 weeks after that Thanksgiving, I pitched a major campaign to a potential client, a national fitness brand that wanted to shift their messaging toward body positivity and inclusive wellness. They loved it. More than that, they loved that I brought an authentic perspective to the table. My boss, Patricia, called me into her office the day after the pitch. She was a formidable woman in her 50s, with gray hair she wore in a sharp bob, and a reputation for being brilliant and exacting. "That was extraordinary, Emma," she said. "I want you to lead this account. It's going to be our biggest project next quarter." I felt something shift inside me. This was the beginning of something. I could feel it. Not just professionally, but personally. I was choosing myself. Finally, completely choosing myself. If you're watching this, please subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story reaches. Your support means everything. The weeks following my decision to distance myself from my father were strange. There was grief, certainly, the kind that comes with accepting that someone you love may never truly see you. But there was also something else. Freedom. January in Boston is brutal. The city turns gray and frozen, and everyone walks hunched against the wind that whips off the Charles River. But I loved it. I loved bundling up in my oversized coat, the one I'd bought from a plus-size boutique that actually designed beautiful clothes instead of trying to hide bodies like mine. I loved grabbing coffee from the shop on my corner, where the baristas knew my order and my name. I loved walking to work through streets that felt alive despite the cold, past brownstones with frost on their windows and the early morning joggers who were crazy enough to brave the weather. The body positivity campaign consumed my days in the best possible way. I worked with a team of designers, copywriters, and strategists to create something that felt genuine rather than performative. We interviewed real people, diverse bodies with diverse stories, about their relationships with fitness and wellness. No before and after photos, no weight loss promises, just honest conversations about movement, strength, and health that wasn't defined by a number on a scale. One of our interview subjects was a woman named Maria, a 52-year-old nurse who'd spent her entire adult life dieting and hating her body. She talked about finally joining a dance class at her local community center and discovering that her body could bring her joy instead of shame. Another was David, a man in his 30s who'd been an athlete in college and then gained weight after an injury. He talked about adaptive fitness programs that helped him reconnect with movement in a way that worked for his body now, not the body he used to have. Their stories resonated with something deep inside me. This wasn't just a campaign. It was a mirror of my own journey. One afternoon in late January, I was in a conference room reviewing footage from our interviews when Patricia stuck her head in. "Emma, there's someone here to see you." My stomach dropped. I knew before she said anything else. My father stood in the reception area, looking out of place in his expensive suit among our agency's deliberately casual aesthetic of exposed brick, vintage furniture, and employees in jeans and sneakers. He looked older than I remembered, or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper. His shoulders, always so straight and commanding, seemed slightly bowed. "Emma," he said when he saw me. "Can we talk?" I glanced at Patricia, who raised her eyebrows questioningly. I shook my head slightly. "I'm working, Dad. This isn't a good time. I drove 2 hours to see you. I didn't ask you to." We stood there in that bright, modern space with my colleagues, pretending not to watch, and I realized something. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. His disapproval, which had once felt like the worst thing in the world, had lost its power over me. I'd built a life without his validation, and that life was good. "There's a coffee shop around the corner," I said finally. 20 minutes, that's all I have." We walked in silence through the cold streets. The coffee shop was busy with the late afternoon crowd, people on laptops and students from nearby Berklee College of Music with instrument cases at their feet. We found a table by the window, and I watched him struggle to figure out how to begin. "Your mother is worried," he started. "Don't," I said. "Don't make this about her. If you have something to say it directly." He looked taken aback. I'd never spoken to him like this before. In our family, we were polite. We danced around issues. We never confronted. "I don't understand why you're doing this," he said. "We're your family. And families are supposed to support each other, love each other, not constantly criticize and judge. I never criticized you, Emma. I expressed concern about your health." "No," I said, surprised by how steady my voice remained. "You expressed concern about how I looked, about how my appearance reflected on you. There's a difference, and we both know it. You've never once asked about my actual health. You don't know that my blood pressure is perfect, that my cholesterol levels are excellent, that I can walk 5 miles without getting winded. You've never asked about any of that because it was never about my health. It was about my appearance. About your embarrassment. He was quiet for a moment, stirring sugar into his coffee even though he drank it black. A nervous habit I'd never noticed before. His hands, I realized, were shaking slightly. You don't understand what it's like, he said finally. In my position, at my firm, image matters. The partners notice these things. Clients notice. When we have firm events and you come. When was the last time you invited me to a firm event, Dad? I interrupted. 3 years ago? 4? And I notice you stopped inviting me around the same time I stopped being thin enough to meet your standards. His silence was answer enough. Let me tell you something, I continued, my voice low but firm. I have a good life. A really good one. I have work I'm proud of, work that's actually making a difference. I have friends who value me for who I am, not what I look like. I have hobbies and interests and a whole identity that exists completely outside of your approval. And for the first time in my life, I actually like myself. But you've never asked about any of that. You've never asked what I do at work, what projects I'm excited about, what I'm reading, where I've traveled, who I spend my time with. Nothing. Because to you, I'm not a person. I'm a problem. Emma, that's not fair. Isn't it? Name one thing I've accomplished in the last year. One project I've worked on. One trip I've taken. Anything. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. He couldn't answer. Not because he wasn't smart enough, but because he'd never paid attention. He'd been so focused on the surface that he'd never bothered to look deeper. I'm not doing this to punish you, I said, my voice softening slightly. I'm doing this because I deserve better. I deserve to be seen. Really seen. Not just as a body that disappoints you, but as a whole person with value and accomplishments and depth. When you're ready to actually see me, really see me, you know where to find me. But until then, I'm done trying to be small enough to fit into your idea of acceptable. I stood up, leaving my coffee untouched. My coat was still on. I'd known this wouldn't take long. Emma, please. I have to get back to work, I said. I have a campaign to finish. One that's going to help a lot of people who've felt exactly the way I've felt for most of my life. That matters to me. It should matter to you too. But it doesn't. And I've accepted that. I left him sitting there and walked back to my office through the bitter cold. The wind stung my face, but I didn't cry this time. I felt lighter, clearer, more certain than I'd been about anything in years. When I got back to the office, James was waiting by my desk. You okay? He asked. Yeah, I said, and was surprised to realize I meant it. Yeah, I really am. That evening, Rachel came over with Thai food and wine. We sat on my couch, eating pad Thai straight from the containers, and I told her everything. I'm proud of you, she said when I finished. It takes incredible strength to set those boundaries. It doesn't feel strong, I admitted. It feels scary and sad, and like I'm breaking something that can't be fixed. Maybe, Rachel said gently. Or maybe you're breaking something that was already broken so that something healthier can grow in its place. Either way, you're choosing yourself, and that's always the right choice. We watched bad reality TV and finished the wine, and I went to bed that night feeling like I'd turned a corner. Not healed, not fixed, but moving in the right direction. What would you do in Emma's situation? Have you ever had to set boundaries with family? I really want to know your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below. Spring came to Boston like a promise. The snow melted, revealing months of accumulated grime and discarded coffee cups, but also crocuses pushing up through the softened earth in the public garden. The cherry blossoms bloomed along the esplanade. The city came alive again, and so did I. The body positivity campaign launched in March to immediate attention. We'd created a series of videos featuring our interview subjects, short documentaries about their relationships with movement and wellness. We'd designed print ads that showed people of all sizes engaged in activities they loved. Running, dancing, lifting weights, doing yoga. Not for weight loss, but for the joy of it. We'd crafted social media content that sparked conversation about what health really means. The response was explosive. Not all of it was positive. There were think pieces about whether fitness brands should be promoting what critics called obesity. There were social media debates about health and responsibility. There were comments, thousands of them, arguing about whether people like me should be visible at all, whether showing fat people being active was encouraging an unhealthy lifestyle. I'd expected some of this, but the vitriol still stung. People who'd never met me felt entitled to comment on my health, my choices, my worth. But there were also messages, hundreds of them, people thanking us, sharing their own stories, saying they finally felt seen. One message came from a teenage girl who said she'd been considering purging after meals, but our campaign made her realize her body wasn't the enemy. Another came from a man in his 60s who'd given up on exercise entirely after gaining weight following retirement, but was inspired to join a walking group. A mother wrote about showing the ads to her daughter and having their first honest conversation about body image. These messages sustained me through the criticism. They reminded me why this work mattered. One evening in late March, I was at my desk reviewing analytics and reading through comments when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Emma Hartwell?" A woman's voice, professional and warm. "My name is Dr. Jennifer Wu. I'm a psychologist specializing in body image and family dynamics, and I've been following your campaign. The work you're doing is remarkable. I'm speaking at a conference on health and wellness next month in New York, and I'd love for you to join a panel discussion about the intersection of marketing, body positivity, and public health. Would you be interested?" I almost said no. I was a marketer, not an advocate. I created campaigns. I didn't stand on stages and share my personal story. But something in me had shifted over these months. The boundaries I'd set with my father had opened something up inside me. A willingness to be visible, to take up space, to use my voice. Yes, I heard myself say, I'd be honored. The conference was in New York, a massive event at the Javits Center with thousands of healthcare professionals, fitness experts, and wellness advocates. Dr. Wu sent me details about the panel. It would be 90 minutes, focusing on challenging weight stigma in healthcare and wellness industries. The other panelists included a nutritionist who worked with eating disorder recovery, a physical therapist who specialized in adaptive fitness, and a sociologist who studied weight discrimination in healthcare settings. I'd never spoken publicly about anything beyond marketing strategies and campaign results. Now I was supposed to talk about my personal experience in front of hundreds of people, maybe thousands. The weeks leading up to the conference were consumed with preparation. I wrote notes, practiced my talking points, rehearsed potential questions. Rachel helped me pick out an outfit, a custom-tailored suit in deep burgundy that made me feel powerful and professional. Patricia gave me the day off and told me she was proud of me. "You're not just representing the agency," she said. "You're doing something important. Take your time with this." The night before the panel, I took the train down to New York. The city was alive with early spring energy, people dining outside despite the chill, street performers on every corner, the perpetual hum of traffic and humanity. I checked into my hotel overlooking the Hudson River and immediately regretted it. I couldn't sleep. I paced my room going over my notes, second-guessing every word. What if I wasn't articulate enough? What if people dismissed me? What if I confirmed every negative stereotype my father believed about me? At 3 a.m, I called Rachel. "I can't do this," I said. "This was a mistake." "Emma," she said, her voice thick with sleep but patient. "Why did you say yes to this?" "I don't know. I thought I had something to contribute." "You do. You absolutely do. Your story matters. Your perspective matters. And tomorrow, you're going to walk out on that stage, and you're going to be brilliant because you're speaking your truth. That's all you have to do. What if my truth isn't enough? It will be. I promise you, it will be." I hung up, feeling marginally better, and finally fell asleep around 4. The conference center was overwhelming. Thousands of people in business attire, name badges everywhere, vendors hawking everything from medical equipment to wellness apps. I found the room where our panel would be held, a massive auditorium with rows of seats stretching back into darkness. Dr. Wu met me backstage. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes and an easy confidence. "Emma, thank you so much for doing this. Are you nervous?" "Terrified," I admitted. "That's normal. Just remember, you're here because you have expertise they don't. You've lived this. That's invaluable." The other panelists arrived. Dr. Sarah Chen, the nutritionist, who had a warm smile and immediately complimented my suit. Marcus Williams, the physical therapist, who was in his 50s and had a booming laugh, and Dr. Angela Martinez, the sociologist, who was petite and fierce and looked like she could dismantle bad arguments with a single glance. The auditorium was packed when we walked out. Every seat filled, people standing in the back. I sat on that stage, lights bright in my eyes, and listened as Dr. Wu introduced our topic, Beyond the Scale, Rethinking Health, Wellness, and Worth. She started by presenting research about weight stigma in healthcare settings. Studies showing that fat patients received less time with doctors were less likely to receive preventive care screenings, had their symptoms dismissed as weight-related even when they weren't. The statistics were damning. Then Dr. Chen talked about the relationship between shame and eating disorders, about how diet culture creates the very problems it claims to solve. Marcus discussed adaptive fitness and the importance of meeting people where they are rather than where we think they should be. When it was my turn to speak, I talked about the campaign, about the research we'd done showing that shame-based marketing not only doesn't work, but actively causes harm, about the careful balance between encouraging health-promoting behaviors and avoiding the language of shame that had dominated wellness marketing for decades. And then someone in the audience raised their hand. A middle-aged man in a doctor's coat. Dr. Wu called on him. "This is all well and good," he said, "but isn't there a responsibility to acknowledge the health risks of obesity? Aren't we doing people a disservice by not being honest about that?" The question I'd been dreading. The audience shifted, waiting to see how I'd respond. I took a breath. "Can I tell you something personal?" I said. "My father is a successful lawyer, objectively healthy by every medical metric. Perfect BMI, excellent cholesterol, runs 5 miles every morning. He's also been emotionally unavailable and judgmental for as long as I can remember. His inability to express love or acceptance, his constant criticism, his need for everything to appear perfect on the surface, that's caused real harm to our family. To me specifically. I've spent years in therapy dealing with the damage, but no one talks about that as a health issue. No one suggests he's being irresponsible or that he should be less visible in his professional life because his emotional unavailability might be a bad example." The room was silent. I continued. "I'm not saying weight doesn't impact health, but I am saying that we've created a world where someone's body size is treated as a moral failing while other forms of harm get a pass. We worry about the health of fat people while ignoring the health impact of weight stigma itself. The depression, the anxiety, the eating disorders, the avoidance of health care, because people are tired of being lectured. And I'm saying that shame has never made anyone healthier. It's just made us smaller, quieter, less visible. And I'm done with that. We all should be done with that." The applause started slowly, then built. People were standing. Dr. Wu was smiling. Dr. Martinez was nodding vigorously. After the panel, people lined up to talk to me. They shared their stories. They thanked me. They asked questions. One woman, probably in her 60s, grabbed my hand and said, "I've spent 50 years hating my body. 50 years. And in 5 minutes you articulated something I've always felt but never had words for. Thank you for saying what I've always believed but was too afraid to say." I flew back to Boston that evening, exhausted but exhilarated. Something was changing, not just in me, but in how I understood my own story. This wasn't just about my father anymore. It was bigger than that. It was about systems and cultures and the ways we've all been taught that some bodies matter more than others. When I got home, there was a letter waiting for me. Not an email, an actual letter, my mother's handwriting on the envelope. My hand shook as I opened it. "Emma, I've read about what you're doing. I saw a clip from your panel someone posted online. I am so proud of you, even if I've never known how to say it. Your father doesn't understand. I'm not sure I do either, completely. but I'm trying. I see now how silent I've been, how complicit in the ways he's treated you. I should have spoken up. I should have protected you. I didn't, and I'm sorry. I hope that means something. I hope it's not too late. Love, Mom. I held that letter for a long time, reading it over and over. It wasn't everything. It didn't undo years of silence, but it was something. A crack in the wall I'd built around myself for protection. A possibility that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. That night, I started writing. Not for work, not for a campaign, but for myself. I wrote about growing up in a home where love felt conditional, about learning to make myself invisible, about the slow, painful process of taking up space again, about discovering that my worth wasn't determined by my father's approval or society's beauty standards. I didn't know what I'd do with these words. I just knew I needed to say them, to claim my own story, to speak my truth into existence. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own happiness? What did you do? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. By June, the campaign had exceeded every projection. The fitness brand we'd partnered with saw a 30% increase in customer engagement, and, more importantly, they'd attracted a demographic that had previously felt excluded from fitness culture entirely. Women over 40, who'd been told they were too old or too out of shape. Disabled people who'd never seen themselves represented in fitness marketing. People of all sizes who wanted to move their bodies without shame, who wanted to focus on what their bodies could do rather than what they looked like. The campaign won 3 major industry awards. Adweek featured it as a case study in authentic marketing. Patricia called me into her office on a humid afternoon when Boston felt like it was melting, the kind of oppressive heat that makes the city smell like hot concrete and desperation. "We're expanding your role," she said, getting straight to the point as she always did. "I want you to head up a new division focused on inclusive marketing. You'd have your own team, your own budget, full creative control. We're calling it the Authentic Engagement Division. What do you say?" What I said was yes, before she'd even finished the question. My own division, my own team, the opportunity to do this work not just once, but as my entire focus. It felt surreal and terrifying and exactly right. The next few months were a blur of hiring, strategizing, and building something from the ground up. I hired a team of talented people who brought perspectives I'd never considered. A designer named Marcus, who used a wheelchair and opened my eyes to how inaccessible so much of our visual culture was. A copywriter named Jordan, who was transgender and helped me understand the violence of being consistently misgendered in marketing materials. A strategist named Latoya, who'd grown up in poverty and understood how class intersected with every other identity, how marketing that assumed everyone had disposable income alienated huge swaths of potential customers. Together, we created campaigns that felt revolutionary because they simply showed the world as it actually was. Diverse, complex, beautiful in its variety. We worked with a clothing brand to feature real customers of all sizes wearing their clothes in everyday situations. We partnered with a skincare company to show people with acne, wrinkles, scars, and vitiligo. We created an ad for a furniture company that showed families of all configurations, single parents, same-sex couples, multi-generational households, chosen families. The work was fulfilling in a way nothing had ever been before. Every campaign felt personal. Every success felt like pushing back against the forces that had tried to make me invisible. I barely had time to think about my family. My brother called occasionally, awkward check-ins where he asked how I was doing without mentioning the elephant in the room. We'd have surface-level conversations about work and weather, and I could hear the discomfort in his voice. He was stuck in the middle, trying to maintain relationships with everyone, and I felt bad for him. But not bad enough to back down. My mother sent cards for my birthday in July and the 4th of July holiday, always with the same message, thinking of you. Love, Mom. Sometimes she included newspaper clippings about my work, articles that mentioned me, or the campaigns I'd led. She was following my career from a distance, proud, but still silent where it mattered. My father never reached out. Part of me was relieved. Part of me grieved the relationship we'd never had, and probably never would. I told myself I didn't care. Most days, I almost believed it. But in September, on a Tuesday afternoon when I was in a strategy meeting reviewing mock-ups for a new campaign, my phone rang. My brother's name flashed on the screen. I almost declined the call. Meetings were sacred time, but something made me step out into the hallway. "Emma!" His voice was tight, frightened in a way I'd never heard before. Michael, who'd always been so composed, so controlled, sounded like he was barely holding himself together. "It's Dad. He had a heart attack." The world tilted. The hallway, with its framed ads and potted plants, seemed to blur at the edges. "What?" "This morning. He was at work, in a meeting with clients. He collapsed. They called 911. He's at Yale New Haven Hospital. Mom's there now. It's serious, Em. They're saying the next 24 hours are critical." My mind went blank, then flooded with questions. "Is he conscious? What did they say? What kind of heart attack?" "I don't know all the details. Massive, they said. He needed emergency surgery." "Emma, can you come? Mom is falling apart and I can't. I don't know how to handle this." I looked back at the conference room where my team was waiting. At the life I'd built that had nothing to do with my father, at the person I'd become without his approval. And then I thought about the last conversation we'd had, me walking away from him in that coffee shop, and the possibility that those might be the last words we ever exchanged. "I'll be there as soon as I can," I said. I was in my car within 15 minutes, my assistant handling the meeting I'd abandoned. The drive to New Haven felt like moving through water, everything slow and heavy and wrong. I called Patricia from the road, explaining the situation. "Take whatever time you need," she said immediately. "Family comes first." But was he family? Really? When had he ever acted like it? The hospital was sterile and too bright, the emergency room waiting area filled with people in various states of crisis. My mother was there, sitting in a plastic chair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. She'd always been so carefully put together, every hair in place, makeup perfectly applied. Now her mascara was smudged, her hair disheveled, and she looked her age in a way I'd never noticed before. "Emma," she said when she saw me, and started crying. I held her, this woman who'd stood silent while her husband diminished her daughter, and felt the complicated tangle of anger and love that family creates. Her body shook against mine, and I realized she was terrified of losing him. Whatever their marriage was, however imperfect, she loved him. "It's going to be okay," I said, not knowing if that was true. My brother arrived an hour later, still in his suit from work, his tie loosened and his face pale. The three of us sat together in that awful waiting room with its fluorescent lights and vending machines, not saying much because what was there to say? We waited. Hours passed. A doctor came out periodically with updates that were mostly medical jargon neither my mother nor brother fully understood. Triple bypass surgery, arterial blockage, cardiac event. I took notes, asked questions, translated the medical speak into terms they could grasp. My marketing brain, trained to communicate clearly, found purpose in breaking down complex information. "When can we see him?" my mother kept asking. "Soon," they kept saying. It was nearly midnight when they finally let us in, one at a time, for 5 minutes each. My mother went first, then my brother. Then it was my turn. I almost said no. Part of me wanted to leave, to let him face this without me the way I'd faced so much without him, to prove that I didn't need him, that his absence from my life hadn't destroyed me. But I walked through those ICU doors anyway, past the nurse's station with its monitors and beeping machines, into the small room where my father lay connected to more tubes and wires than seemed possible. He looked fragile in that hospital bed, machines beeping their steady rhythm beside him. His silver hair was disheveled, his skin was gray. He looked old and small and human in a way I'd never seen him before. Not the commanding lawyer who could dominate a room, not the critical father whose approval I'd chased for years, just a 62-year-old man who'd nearly died. His eyes opened when I approached, slowly, as if it took enormous effort. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something I couldn't quite name. Shame, maybe, or fear, or the realization of how close he'd come to losing everything, including the chance to ever make things right with me. "Emma," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the machines. I stood there, looking at this man who'd shaped so much of my pain, and felt something unexpected. Pity. Not forgiveness, not yet. Not even sympathy exactly. But a recognition that he was just a person, flawed and frightened and mortal. That whatever power I'd given him over my sense of worth, he was just human, just as broken as anyone else. I'm here, I said, not sure what else to offer. I'm sorry. His voice was barely audible, tears running down his face. I was wrong. About everything. I was wrong, and I'm sorry, and I'm terrified I'll never get the chance to make it right. I'd imagined this moment so many times, the apology I'd always wanted. In my fantasies, it felt triumphant, vindicating, proof that I'd been right all along. But standing there in that hospital room, watching my father cry, all I felt was tired. We'll talk about this, I said finally. When you're better, when you're not scared and medicated and facing your mortality, we'll talk. Please don't leave. His hand moved slightly as if reaching for me. Please. I took his hand. It was cold and dry, so different from the strong, confident grip I remembered. I'm not going anywhere tonight, I said. But Dad, an apology extracted in crisis doesn't erase years of hurt. You understand that, right? He nodded, more tears falling. I left the room before my 5 minutes were up. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall and tried to breathe, my heart pounding like I'd run a marathon. My brother found me there. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. He's my father, I replied, the words automatic. Of course I came. But even as I said it, I knew something had fundamentally changed. His heart attack hadn't magically healed our relationship. His apology, extracted in a moment of fear and vulnerability, didn't undo years of harm, but it had opened a door. What happened next, whether we walked through it or let it close again, was up to both of us. When someone hurts you for years and then apologizes, what do? Is forgiveness automatic, or does it have to be earned? I'm curious what you all think. My father survived, though recovery was slow and complicated. Triple bypass surgery, weeks in the hospital, then months of cardiac rehabilitation. My mother called me weekly with updates, her voice always tired but grateful. I listened, offered advice when asked, helped her navigate the medical system and insurance paperwork. But I didn't rush back to Connecticut. I didn't put my life on hold. I was busy. In October, my team launched a campaign for a major retail brand that had taken a risk on us. They wanted to completely overhaul their marketing to feature real customers of all sizes, abilities, and backgrounds. We spent months casting, interviewing, photographing. The final campaign showed people wearing the brand's clothes in their actual lives, at work, at home, at the gym, at parties. No professional models, no retouching, just real people being themselves. The backlash was immediate and intense. Social media erupted with debates about whether the brand was promoting obesity or glorifying unhealthy lifestyles. Conservative commentators dedicated entire segments to clutching their pearls about it. But the support was equally intense. The campaign went viral. People shared photos of themselves in the brand's clothes with stories about finally feeling represented. Sales increased 40% in the first month. The brand's CEO called me personally to thank me. "You've changed our entire company culture," she said. "Our employees feel more valued. Our customers feel seen. This is exactly what we needed." Other brands started calling. Fashion companies, beauty brands, even a major airline wanted to talk about inclusive marketing. I was invited to speak at more conferences, to participate in panel discussions, to consult on diversity initiatives. Adweek ran a profile calling me the marketer redefining inclusion in advertising. My inbox overflowed with opportunities. I hired more people for my division. We moved into a bigger office space. Patricia told me she was considering making me a partner in the agency. "You've transformed how we do business," she said. "Clients specifically request you now. You're not just an employee anymore. You're a vital part of this company's identity." My life was full, busy, successful. I had work I loved, colleagues who respected me, a growing reputation in my industry. I had friends, a vibrant social life, hobbies I enjoyed. I'd started dating casually, nothing serious yet, but it felt good to put myself out there without the weight of shame I'd carried for so long. And yet, one Thursday evening in late October, I was leaving the office when my phone rang. My father's number. I hadn't spoken to him directly since the hospital, though I'd gotten updates through my mother and brother. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. "Emma?" His voice was stronger now, though still not quite the commanding tone I remembered. "I was wondering if you might have time to meet. Just the two of us. I'd like to talk." "About what?" "About you, about your life, about everything I should have asked about years ago." I was silent for a long moment, standing on the sidewalk outside my office building while the city moved around me. People heading home after work, street vendors packing up, the autumn air crisp and clean. "Saturday," I said finally. "There's a cafe in Boston, near my apartment. I'll text you the address." He agreed immediately, too quickly, as if afraid I'd change my mind. That Saturday, I woke early and went for a walk along the Charles River. The morning was crisp and bright, the water reflecting the blue sky. The trees along the esplanade were brilliant with fall color, reds and golds and oranges. I watched the crew teams out on the water, their oars cutting through the surface in perfect synchronization, and thought about the girl I'd been. She'd been desperate for her father's approval, willing to shrink herself to earn his love. She'd believed that if she could just be thin enough, pretty enough, successful enough, he would finally see her worth. She'd spent years chasing a moving target, never quite good enough. And the woman I'd become? She'd learned to approve of herself. She'd built a life that didn't require his validation. She'd discovered that her worth wasn't determined by his opinion or society's beauty standards or anyone else's judgment. She was enough, exactly as she was. My father arrived at the cafe exactly on time, another habit that hadn't changed. Punctuality was one of his core values, along with appearance and reputation. He looked different in casual clothes, jeans and a cardigan instead of his usual suit. More human, more real. He'd lost weight, I noticed, but not in a healthy way. He looked diminished. We ordered coffee and found a table by the window overlooking a quiet street in the South End. He added sugar to his coffee nervously, stirring it even though he'd always drunk it black. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. "You said you wanted to talk about my life. So talk." He took a breath, clearly nervous. My father, who'd built a career on confident presentations and commanding courtrooms, looked uncertain, vulnerable. "I realized in the hospital," he started, "that I don't actually know what you do. I mean, I know you work in marketing, but I don't really understand what that means day to day, what your work actually involves, what you care about, what excites you." So I told him, not to impress him or win his approval, but because he'd asked. I told him about the campaigns we'd built, the philosophy behind inclusive marketing, why representation matters. I told him about the teams I'd assembled, the talented people who'd helped me create work I was proud of. I showed him articles about our campaigns, testimonials from people whose lives had been changed by seeing themselves represented in media for the first time. I showed him the message from the teenage girl who'd been considering purging after meals, but decided not to after seeing our campaign. I showed him the comment from the man in his 60s who'd joined a walking group after years of avoiding exercise because he was embarrassed by his weight. I showed him the email from the mother who'd used our ads to start a conversation with her daughter about body image. "This is what I do," I said. "I help people see themselves. I create marketing that doesn't make people feel like they need to change to be worthy of representation. I challenge the industry standards that say only certain bodies, certain people, certain stories are valuable." He listened, really listened, his coffee growing cold in front of him. And when I finished, he said, "Emma, this is extraordinary. This is genuinely important work. I had no idea." "You would have known about it if you'd ever asked," I said. The words gentle, but firm. "I know." He looked down at his hands. "I've been thinking a lot over the past few months. About my own father. He was hard on me growing up, always pushing me to achieve, to be perfect. Nothing I did was ever quite good enough. I was a straight A student, but he wanted me at the top of my class. I made partner at my firm, but he wanted me at a more prestigious one. I thought that was what fathers did, that pushing you was how I showed I cared. But you weren't pushing me to achieve, I said. You were pushing me to be smaller. Literally, you never cared about my accomplishments. You cared about how I looked, about how my appearance reflected on you. I see that now. He met my eyes, and I saw genuine remorse there, real understanding. I let my own insecurities and prejudices blind me to who you actually are. I was so worried about what other people thought, about maintaining this perfect image, that I lost sight of what actually mattered. I lost years with my daughter, and that's on me, all of it. I felt tears threatening, but held them back. I'd cried enough over this relationship. You hurt me, Dad. Deeply. For years. Every comment about my weight, every disapproving look, every time you changed the subject when I tried to tell you about my life. It all added up, and I need you to understand that your apology, as sincere as it might be, doesn't just erase that. I know. I don't expect it to. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Emma. I know I don't deserve it, not yet, maybe not ever. I'm asking for a chance to actually get to know you, to be the father I should have been all along. We talked for 3 hours that morning, our coffee cups refilled twice. He asked questions about my work, my apartment, my friends. He asked what I did for fun, what I was reading, where I liked to eat in the city. Small things, normal things. The kind of questions parents ask their adult children when they're actually interested in their lives. He told me about his recovery, about cardiac rehab, about the therapy his doctor had recommended. I've been seeing a counselor, he said, about my heart attack, but also about everything else. My need for control, my fear of imperfection, the ways I've hurt people, especially you, because I couldn't accept anything that didn't fit my narrow view of how things should be. That's good, I said. I'm glad you're doing that. She asked me to make a list, he continued, of the things I'm proud of in my life. And Emma, you were on that list. Not because of anything you've done, but because of who you are, your strength, your resilience. The fact that you've built this incredible life despite having a father who made you feel like you weren't enough. You are enough. You've always been enough. I'm so sorry it took me this long to see it. When we finally stood to leave, he hesitated. Would it be okay if I gave you a hug? I hesitated too, then nodded. His hug was tentative, careful, as if he was afraid I might break, or as if he was afraid I might push him away. I hugged him back, not quite ready to forgive, but willing to try, willing to see if we could build something new from the ruins of what had been. Over the next months, we developed a new relationship, slowly, carefully. He drove to Boston once a month, and we'd have coffee or lunch. We'd walk along the Esplanade if the weather was nice, or browse bookstores in Harvard Square. He started asking about my projects, offering insights from his own legal work that were sometimes actually helpful. When I mentioned I was thinking about writing a book about my experiences in the industry, about body image and family and finding your worth, he said, "You should. You have an important story to tell. And you're a good writer. I read that essay you wrote for Adweek. It was powerful." I was surprised he'd looked for it, that he'd read it, that he had an opinion. This was new territory for both of us. In December, I was invited to give the keynote speech at a major marketing conference in Las Vegas, the biggest opportunity of my career so far. 3,000 industry professionals, prime-time slot, live stream to thousands more online. I almost didn't tell my family. Old habits die hard, and part of me still expected disappointment or disinterest. But my mother called to ask about Christmas plans, and it came up naturally in conversation. "I'll be back by Christmas," I said. "I'm speaking at a conference the week before." "What conference?" my father asked. We were on a video call, another new development. He'd bought himself a tablet and figured out how to use FaceTime so we could talk face to face even when we weren't in the same city. I told him about the conference, about the keynote, trying to downplay how big a deal it was. But I could see his face register surprise, then something else, pride, real, genuine pride. "Emma, that's incredible," he said. "Can I come? I'd really like to hear you speak." I was so shocked I couldn't respond immediately. My father, who'd spent years dismissing my work, Wanted to fly to Las Vegas to hear me give a speech. You don't have to, I started. I want to, he said firmly. If that's okay with you, I'd really like to be there. The day of the keynote, I was more nervous than I'd ever been in my life. 3,000 people. My career on the line. My credibility as an expert. Everything I'd built could be validated or destroyed in the next hour. I stood backstage in my carefully chosen outfit, a custom-made dress in deep sapphire blue that fit perfectly and made me feel powerful, confident, ready. My hair was styled, my makeup professional. I looked good. More importantly, I felt good. And then, peeking out at the audience as they filtered in, I saw them. 5th row center. My mother, my brother, and my father. My whole family had come, without telling me, just to support me. My mother saw me looking and waved. Michael gave me a thumbs up. And my father, my critical, distant father, smiled and nodded. "You've got this," he mouthed. I walked out onto that stage to thunderous applause, the lights bright and the audience vast, and I told my story. All of it. The pain of growing up, feeling like a disappointment. The years of making myself small, literally and figuratively, trying to fit into spaces that were never designed for me. The criticism, the judgment, the way my own father had made me feel like my body was something to be ashamed of. But I also told them about the decision to choose myself, about setting boundaries with people who couldn't see my worth, about building a career based on making space for people who'd been told they didn't belong, about learning that representation matters, that visibility matters, that showing up as your full self, unapologetically, changes not just your own life, but the lives of everyone who's been waiting to see themselves reflected back. My father once told me I embarrassed the family, I said, my voice steady and strong, amplified through the auditorium. He thought my body was something to hide, something to fix, something shameful. He was wrong. I am not an embarrassment. I am not a problem to be solved. I am extraordinary. And so is every person who's been told they're too much or not enough. We are not mistakes. We are not failures. We are people deserving of respect, opportunity, representation, and love exactly as we are. For years I tried to take up less space, I continued. Less space at the dinner table. Less space in family photos. Less space in the world. And then I realized that my small size was exactly what was wanted, not just by my father, but by an entire industry, an entire culture that profits from people hating themselves. So I made a different choice. I chose to take up space, to be visible, to use my voice, to create work that says to people like me, you belong here too. Your story matters. Your body is not wrong. The standing ovation started before I'd finished my last sentence. It lasted 5 minutes, maybe longer. People were crying. They were cheering. They were on their feet. And I stood there on that stage taking it all in, letting myself be seen, letting myself be celebrated. Afterward, the line to talk to me stretched through the convention hall. People waited an hour just to shake my hand, to tell me their stories, to thank me. A woman in her 40s said I'd helped her find the courage to leave a marriage where her husband constantly criticized her weight. A man in his 20s said my work had inspired him to come out as gay to his parents. A marketing executive from a major corporation asked if I'd consult on their diversity initiative. It took 2 hours to get through everyone. My family waited near the back, patient and proud. When I finally reached them, my mother was crying. "Emma, that was beautiful," she said, hugging me tightly. "I'm so sorry for everything, for staying silent, for not protecting you. I'm so sorry and so proud." My brother hugged me next. "You're kind of a badass," he said, grinning. I had no idea. And then my father. He stood there with tears streaming down his face, not trying to hide them, not caring who saw. "Emma," he said, his voice breaking, "I am so incredibly sorry. For everything. For every moment I made you feel less than extraordinary. For every time I prioritized appearances over your well-being. For every year I wasted not knowing what an amazing person you are." He pulled me into a tight hug, the kind of hug I'd wanted my whole childhood and never received. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "I'm so proud of you. and I love you exactly as you are." I let myself cry then, years of pain and anger and grief spilling out, but also relief. Not everything was fixed. We still had work to do, conversations to have, old patterns to unlearn. But this was real. This was a father actually seeing his daughter. This was love without conditions. We had dinner that night, the four of us, in a restaurant overlooking the Las Vegas Strip. The lights of the city sparkled below us as we talked and laughed, and for the first time in years, maybe ever, felt like a real family. I knew we weren't fixed. You don't undo decades of dysfunction with a few months of effort. There would be more difficult conversations, more moments when old patterns would resurface, more times when I'd have to set boundaries and remind him that his discomfort with my body was his problem, not mine. But we were trying. And I'd learned that sometimes trying, really trying, with genuine effort and vulnerability, was enough. On the flight back to Boston a few days later, I looked out at the country passing below, city lights and vast darkness, and I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The girl who'd tried to disappear, to take up as little space as possible. The woman who'd learned to advocate for herself, to set boundaries, to build a life on her own terms. My father had said I embarrassed the family. What he never understood, what it took him years and a near-death experience to finally grasp, was that I wasn't the one who should have been ashamed. The shame belonged to a world that taught people their worth was measured in pounds and inches. The shame belonged to the silence, the complicity, the people who stood by while others were diminished. I wasn't an embarrassment. I was a revolution, and that revolution was just beginning. 6 months later, I published my first book, Taking Up Space, Building a Life Beyond Other People's Expectations. It combined personal narrative with research about body image, family dynamics, and the psychology of shame. It included stories from people I'd interviewed, insights from experts, and practical advice for anyone trying to break free from the expectations that kept them small. The book became a bestseller within 2 weeks. My father read it cover to cover in one sitting and called me crying. "I didn't know," he said, his voice raw. "I didn't understand how much I'd hurt you. Reading it all laid out like that, seeing the impact of my words and actions, Emma, I'm devastated." "I know," I said gently, "but you understand now. That's what matters. Can you ever forgive me?" I thought about that question. About forgiveness and what it means, whether it's something you give or something you arrive at gradually over time. "I'm working on it," I said honestly. "Some days are easier than others, but we're building something new now. That's what matters to me." Today, 2 years after that Thanksgiving when everything changed, I run my own agency. We specialize in inclusive marketing, helping brands connect with audiences they've historically ignored or actively excluded. We're profitable, growing, making a real impact. I've been featured in major publications, invited to speak around the world, recognized as a leader in my field. My father and I have coffee every month. Sometimes he says something that reveals his old thinking, makes an assumption based on appearance, falls back into patterns that took 60+ years to establish. When that happens, I call it out, gently but firmly. And he listens. He apologizes. He tries to do better. My mother and I are building our own relationship, separate from him. We have lunch when I'm in Connecticut, and she's starting to share things she never did before. Her own struggles with body image, her regrets about staying silent, her journey toward finding her own voice. My brother tells me his kids, my niece and nephew, think their Aunt Emma is the coolest person in the world. They've grown up seeing my campaigns, understanding that bodies come in all different shapes and sizes, and they're all okay. They've never questioned whether they belong. I'm still fat. By medical definitions, by BMI charts, by society's standards, I'm obese. I'm also successful, happy, loved, respected, and making a difference in the world. These things coexist. They always have. The only thing that changed was my willingness to believe I deserved all of them. Last month, my father attended a dinner party at his country club, the kind of affluent social gathering where appearances have always mattered so much. Someone asked about his children, making small talk the way people do. "My son is a lawyer at my old firm," he said. following in his old man's footsteps, and my daughter runs a marketing agency in Boston. She's changing how the entire advertising industry thinks about inclusion and representation. She's written a best-selling book. She's been featured in every major marketing publication. She's extraordinary. The person asked what I looked like, because of course they did. In those circles, appearance is always relevant. My father looked at them steadily and said, "She looks happy. She looks confident. She looks like someone who knows exactly who she is and isn't apologizing for it. That's what she looks like, and that's all that matters." My mother told me about it later, her voice full of pride. "I've never loved him more than in that moment," she said. "It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything I'd once dreamed of, the unconditional love and acceptance I'd wanted as a child. But it was growth. Real, significant growth. It was a father finally learning to see his daughter for who she actually was. It was a man confronting his own biases and choosing to change. And sometimes, that's enough. Sometimes, the willingness to grow, to admit you were wrong, to do the hard work of becoming better, that's as close to redemption as we get. I am Emma Hartwell. I am fat. I am successful. I am loved. I am worthy. I take up space, and I will not apologize for it. This is my story, and it's only just beginning. Thank you for being here for Emma's entire journey. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like you had to be smaller to be loved, I want you to know, you deserve to take up space. Your story matters. Your presence matters. You matter, exactly as you are. Drop a comment and tell me what taking up space looks like for you. What does your revolution look like? I'm reading every word and I'm cheering you on.